The low rumble of thunder rolled across the vast Colorado plains as Dakota Fletcher pulled his hat tighter against the coming storm. He hadn't expected to find anything but trouble on his way back to La Junta after 2 weeks of driving cattle, certainly not a woman crumpled beside a lightning-struck cottonwood, her bare feet bloody and her face streaked with tears that mixed with the first drops of rain. The year was 1878, and the West was still wild enough to make a man cautious, but something about her desperation cut through his wariness. Dakota dismounted from his chestnut mare, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. "Madam," he called softly, keeping his distance, "are you hurt?" She startled like a wounded deer, scrambling backward, her torn dress once fine but now mudded and ripped catching on brambles. Her eyes, red-rimmed but a striking hazel, darted toward the horizon as if contemplating flight. "I won't harm you," Dakota said, removing his hat to reveal sun-weathered features and honest blue eyes. At 28, he'd seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize genuine distress. "Name's Dakota Fletcher. I ranch about 15 miles south of La Junta." "I can't," she choked on her words, glancing back toward the east where a faint trail disappeared into the gathering dusk. "They'll be looking for me." Dakota crouched to her level, keeping a respectful distance. "Who's looking for you, madam?" "My husband's family," she whispered. "Former husband," her voice cracked on the word. "They say I disgrace them, that I'm shameful." Rain began to fall in earnest, pelting them both. Dakota made a quick decision and shrugged out of his riding coat, offering it to her. "You don't owe anyone shame," he said firmly, his words nearly lost in a crack of thunder. "Not a soul on this earth has the right to make you feel that way." She looked at him with disbelief, as if those simple words had unlocked something painful within her. When she reached for his coat, he noticed bruises circling her wrists like shadowy bracelets. "Katherine," she said finally. "Katherine Lawson." Dakota nodded, helping her to her feet. "Miss Katherine, there's a storm coming that'll drown us both if we stay. My cabin's not far. You can rest there, tend to those feet, and decide your next move come morning." She hesitated, weighing unknown dangers against the visible ones pursuing her. Finally, she nodded. "I have nothing to pay you with," she warned. Dakota helped her mount his horse, her feet too injured to walk. "I'm not asking for payment." As they rode double through the intensifying storm, Katherine gripping his waist with trembling hands, Dakota felt an unexpected protectiveness surge through him. La Junta and the surrounding territory had its share of rough characters and harder stories, but something told him Katherine Lawson's tale might be among the darkest. And as the lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the path ahead, Dakota Fletcher made a silent promise to himself that whatever shadows were chasing this barefoot, crying woman, they'd have to go through him first to reach her. The ride to Dakota's cabin took longer than usual with the extra weight on his horse and the muddy conditions caused by the rain. By the time they arrived, both were soaked through despite his coat wrapped around Katherine. The small log cabin sat nestled against a hillside, with a barn and corral off to one side where a few horses sought shelter from the storm. "It's not much," Dakota said as he helped her down from the saddle, noticing her wince as her injured feet touched the ground. Without asking permission, he scooped her into his arms and carried her the remaining distance to the cabin door. "But it's dry and warm." Katherine remained tense in his arms but didn't protest. Once inside, Dakota set her gently on a wooden chair near the cold hearth. The cabin was simple one main room with a kitchen area, a table, a few chairs, and a bed pushed against the far wall. A small side room served as storage. It was neat and clean, if sparse. "I need to tend to my horse," Dakota said. "I'll be back in a few minutes. Make yourself at home." When Dakota returned, his hat and coat dripping on the porch outside, he found Katherine hadn't moved from the chair. Her dress clung to her slender frame and she shivered visibly. "You'll catch your death in those wet clothes," Dakota said, moving to light the fire. "I have some shirts and trousers that might fit you well enough until we can dry your things." Her eyes widened slightly. "I couldn't." "You can and you will," Dakota interrupted firmly but gently. "No sense in escaping whatever you're running from only to die of pneumonia in my cabin." Once the fire was crackling, Dakota fetched his cleanest shirt, a pair of drawstring trousers, and a blanket. He set them on the table beside her. "I'll step outside while you change," he said. "There's a basin on the counter if you want to wash up. I'll bring in some more water for your feet when you're decent." When Katherine called him back in, Dakota found her swimming in his clothes, the shirt reaching nearly to her knees, the pants cinched tight and rolled up several times at the ankles. She'd pulled her long chestnut hair back with a piece of string and washed her face. Without the mud and tears, she was strikingly beautiful, though still clearly exhausted and frightened. Dakota carried in a basin of fresh water and set it at her feet. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her injuries. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Dakota knelt before her and gently lifted one foot into the basin. She hissed at the contact with water. "I'm sorry," he said, working as gently as possible to clean the dirt and blood away. "How far did you walk like this?" "I'm not sure," she said quietly. "I lost my shoes in the river crossing, maybe 10 miles back. I was trying to throw off the dogs." Dakota's jaw tightened. "They sent dogs after you. My father-in-law has hunting hounds," she explained, her voice distant. "They're very good at tracking." As Dakota tended to her feet, finding numerous cuts and blisters, Katherine slowly began to share fragments of her story. She had been married at 18 to Thomas Lawson, son of Bartholomew Lawson, a wealthy landowner from Kansas City. The marriage had been arranged, more a business transaction between her father and the Lawsons than a love match. Thomas was. She paused, searching for words. "He was not what he seemed during our courtship. After we married, he became cruel, controlling." Dakota found a jar of salve and began applying it to the worst of her cuts. "What happened to him? You said former husband." Katherine's hands twisted in her lap. "He died 3 months ago, thrown from his horse while drunk." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "His father blamed me. Said I drove him to drink with my disobedience. He threatened to have me committed to an asylum for melancholia and inappropriate behavior." "So you ran," Dakota concluded, wrapping her feet with strips of clean cloth. "I had to," she said. "His mother took my clothes. My shoes said I didn't deserve them since they were bought with Lawson money. I managed to take a few dollars I'd hidden away and slipped out 3 nights ago." Dakota finished bandaging her feet and moved to put a kettle on for coffee. "You're safe here for now," he said. "When the storm passes, we can figure out where you want to go next." "I don't know where to go," Katherine admitted. "I have no family left. My father died last year and my mother passed when I was a child. I was planning to try to reach Denver, find work somehow." "First things first," Dakota said, setting a mug of coffee before her. "Rest, heal, then we'll sort out the rest." As the storm raged outside, they sat in the warm glow of the fire. Two strangers brought together by circumstance, neither knowing how their lives had just irrevocably changed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Dakota had slept on a bedroll near the door, insisting Katherine take his bed. He woke at first light, as was his habit, and found her still sleeping, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been the previous evening. Dakota moved quietly, stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of bacon, biscuits, and coffee. The familiar routine helped settle his mind, which had been troubled by Katherine's story and the unexpected complication she presented to his orderly life. The smell of food soon roused Katherine. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then seemed to remember where she was. She ran a hand through her tangled hair and adjusted Dakota's oversized clothes before attempting to stand. "Morning," Dakota said, watching as she tested her weight on her bandaged feet. "How are they feeling?" "Better, thank you," she replied, though her wince as she crossed to the table suggested otherwise. "I've imposed on you enough. Perhaps after breakfast you could point me toward the nearest town." Dakota set a plate in front of her. "La Junta's about 15 miles south, but you're in no condition to walk and I don't imagine you're much of a rider." She looked down at her food. "I can't stay here." "Why not?" "At least until your feet heal." Katherine met his eyes directly. "Because Bartholomew Lawson is not a man who gives up easily, Mr. Fletcher. If his men track me here, you'll be in danger too." Dakota considered this as he poured her coffee. I've faced my share of trouble before, Miss Lawson. Besides, my nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and few people come this way except those with specific business. You're safer here than trying to make your way to La Junta with injured feet and no resources. Katherine seemed to be weighing his words, hunger and practicality warring with her fear. Finally, she picked up her fork. Perhaps, just until my feet heal enough to walk properly. They ate in companionable silence for a while. Dakota wasn't a man of many words, and Katherine seemed lost in her own thoughts. When they'd finished, he cleared the plates and refilled their coffee cups. I have chores to tend to, he said. Will you be all right here alone for a while? She nodded. I can help with something, perhaps mending. I noticed your shirt has a tear at the elbow. Dakota smiled slightly. That would be much appreciated. There's a sewing basket in that trunk by the window. My mother's, he added, a brief shadow crossing his face. I keep meaning to learn how to use it properly, but you're a rancher, not a seamstress, Katherine finished for him, offering a small smile in return, the first he'd seen from her. As days stretched into a week, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Dakota would handle the outside work, tending to his small herd of cattle, mending fences, caring for his horses, while Katherine gradually took over the household tasks as her strength returned. Her feet healed slowly but steadily, and by the end of the week, she could move around the cabin with minimal discomfort. Dakota found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each day. Katherine was intelligent and well-read, and their conversations over meals had become the highlight of his routine. She never asked about the photograph he kept beside his bed, his parents and younger sister, all long gone from typhoid fever, and he didn't press her for more details about her marriage than she volunteered. On the 8th day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Katherine finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. I should leave soon, she said quietly. I've imposed long enough and my feet are much better. Dakota remained silent, watching a hawk circle in the distance. Part of him wanted to ask her to stay, but he had no right to make such a request of a woman he barely knew, a woman still running from her past. Where will you go? He asked finally. Denver, I think. I have some skill with numbers. I kept the books for my father's store before I was married. Perhaps I could find work as a clerk or bookkeeper. Dakota nodded slowly. It's a good plan. Denver's growing fast, plenty of opportunity there. He hesitated. I need to go into La Junta tomorrow for supplies. You could come along, see if there's a stage heading north. The light was fading, but he thought he saw disappointment flash across her face before she composed herself. Yes, that would be sensible. Thank you. They sat in silence as darkness fell, each contemplating a return to solitude neither was eager to embrace. The trip to La Junta the next day was tense with unspoken words. Dakota had found an old pair of boots that, with extra socks, fit Katherine well enough for the journey. He'd also given her one of his older shirts and a vest that she'd modified to fit her frame. With her hair tucked under a spare hat, she could pass for a young man from a distance, a precaution they'd agreed upon in case Lawson's men were watching the town. La Junta was a modest but growing settlement, benefiting from the recently established railway connection. As they rode down the main street, Dakota noticed Katherine taking in the surroundings with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. We'll check the stage schedule first, Dakota said as they dismounted in front of the general store. Then I'll get my supplies while you wait at the hotel cafe. Less chance of anyone taking notice of you there. The station master informed them that the next stage to Denver wouldn't depart until the following afternoon. Dakota arranged for a ticket, paying with his own money despite Katherine's protests. Consider it a loan, he said firmly. You can repay me once you're settled in Denver. They were heading toward the hotel when Dakota noticed Katherine suddenly stiffen beside him. Following her gaze, he spotted 3 men outside the saloon across the street. They were dressed well enough to stand out in the dusty frontier town, and something about their bearing suggested they weren't local ranchers or farmers. Inside now, Dakota murmured, guiding Katherine into the general store with a hand at her back. Are those Lawson's men? She nodded, her face pale. The one in the black coat is Jasper Rowe, his foreman. The others are ranch hands who sometimes do his special errands. Dakota peered through the window. The men were showing something to a group of locals, likely a description or drawing of Katherine. "They must have tracked me to the area somehow," Katherine whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We need to leave before someone remembers seeing you carry me to your cabin during the storm," Dakota thought quickly. "My friend Daniel owns this store. Wait here." He returned moments later after a hushed conversation with the proprietor. "There's a back door. Daniel's wagon is loaded with supplies heading out to some of the outlying farms. He's agreed to hide you under the tarp until we're clear of town." "What about you?" Katherine asked. "I'll follow at a distance once I've finished my business," Dakota replied. "If I suddenly leave town with a stranger right after those men arrive asking questions, it'll raise suspicions." The plan worked, though not without a few tense moments. Dakota had to engage in casual conversation with several townspeople while Lawson's men circulated nearby. He made his purchases with deliberate slowness, even stopping for a quick meal at the cafe, all while maintaining awareness of the men's movements. By mid-afternoon, he was finally able to leave town, riding casually until he was well out of sight before spurring his horse to catch up with Daniel's wagon. They made the switch several miles from town, Katherine climbing onto Dakota's horse behind him while Daniel continued his deliveries. "They won't give up," Katherine said as they rode back toward the cabin. "They'll keep asking questions. Someone will remember eventually." Dakota knew she was right. "Then we need a better plan than Denver." Back at the cabin, they discussed options long into the night. Katherine was adamant about not endangering Dakota further, while he insisted he couldn't in good conscience send her off alone with Lawson's men so close. "I have a cousin in California," Dakota said eventually. "Runs a successful ranch near Sacramento. He's been asking me to join him for years, says there's good land available nearby." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "You'd leave your home because of me?" Dakota stared into the fire. "This place, it's just land and logs. After my family died, I came out here to be alone." "But the truth is, Katherine, this past week with you here has made me realize how empty it's been." "I can't ask you to uproot your life," she protested. "You're not asking, I'm offering." Dakota met her eyes. "We could travel together, safety in numbers. Once we reach California, you'd be free to go your own way if you wished, but Lawson's reach won't extend that far." Katherine was quiet for a long moment. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." Dakota considered his words carefully. "I know you're brave enough to flee a dangerous situation barefoot. I know you're kind enough to mend my shirts without being asked. I know you're smart and resourceful." He paused. "And I know that the thought of you leaving tomorrow makes me more unhappy than I've been in a long time." Color rose in Katherine's cheeks. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly. "This connection between us." "Is it enough to trust me?" Dakota asked. "To come with me to California?" Their eyes met across the small room, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Katherine nodded. "Yes," she said. "I trust you, Dakota Fletcher." It took them 3 days to prepare for the journey. Dakota sold most of his cattle to a neighboring rancher, keeping only his best horses. He packed essential supplies, including the small box of family mementos he couldn't bear to leave behind. Katherine sewed hidden pockets into their clothing for the money from the cattle sale, and Dakota taught her to handle his spare revolver just in case. They left before dawn on the 4th day, taking a roundabout route to avoid La Junta entirely. Their destination was Pueblo, where they planned to catch the westbound train to California. The journey to Pueblo was tense but uneventful. They traveled mainly at night and stayed off the main roads, making camp in secluded locations where Dakota's knowledge of the territory kept them safe. During these quiet evenings by small, carefully screened fires, they continued to learn about each other. Dakota told Katherine about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his family to typhoid when he was 20, and his subsequent journey west to escape the memories. Katherine shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her father's general store, and her mother's death when she was 12. She spoke little of her marriage, but one night, as they sat beneath a canopy of stars, she finally revealed the full extent of her ordeal with Thomas Lawson. "He was charming at first," she said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "My father was ill, the store was failing, and the Lawsons offered what seemed like salvation marriage to their son and financial security for my father." Dakota listened silently as she described Thomas's gradual transformation after their wedding, how his initial attentiveness gave way to possessiveness, then control, then cruelty. How her father's death 6 months into the marriage had left her completely at the Lawsons' mercy. How Thomas's drinking had worsened, along with his temper. "The night before he died," Katherine whispered, "he beat me so badly I couldn't rise from bed the next day. That's why he was drunk when he went riding. He was celebrating what he called teaching me my place." Dakota's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "When they brought news of his death, I felt relief," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "And then guilt for feeling relieved, but his parents saw my relief, I think. That's when everything got worse. They kept me virtually imprisoned in the house, saying I was unwell with grief. Bartholomew began making arrangements with a doctor friend who ran an asylum." She shuddered. "I overheard them discussing treatments to cure my rebellious nature." "So you escaped," Dakota said softly. "I had to," she nodded. "I took money I'd hidden from my father's store, waited until the housekeeper was distracted, and ran. I didn't even have time to take proper shoes or a coat." Dakota moved closer, cautiously placing his arm around her shoulders. When she didn't pull away but leaned into him instead, he tightened his embrace. "You survived," he said, "and no one will ever treat you that way again, not while I'm breathing." Katherine looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "I believe you," she said simply. In that moment, beneath the vast Colorado sky, something shifted between them, a trust deepening into something neither was ready to name, but both could feel taking root. They reached Pueblo without incident and secured tickets on the westbound train departing the following morning. Dakota found them rooms at a modest hotel near the station, insisting on adjoining rooms with a connecting door for safety. As they settled in for their last night before the long journey west, Dakota realized how drastically his life had changed in less than 2 weeks. He had left behind the solitary existence he'd built, sold most of his possessions, and committed to traveling across the country, all for a woman he barely knew yet felt connected to in ways he couldn't explain. Katherine seemed to be having similar thoughts as they shared a simple meal in her room. "Are you certain about this?" she asked. "Leaving everything behind, for me," Dakota considered her question seriously. "I'm certain about getting you to safety," he said. "And I'm certain that the life I had before you arrived wasn't much of a life at all." He met her eyes. "The rest we can figure out along the way." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Their fingers intertwined, and in that simple touch was the promise of possibilities neither had dared imagine before. The train journey west proved to be both challenging and revealing. For Dakota, who had never traveled by rail for any significant distance, the crowded conditions and constant noise were unsettling after years of solitude. For Katherine, who had spent months virtually imprisoned in the Lawson house, the freedom of movement and ever-changing scenery were intoxicating. They maintained the pretense that Katherine was Dakota's younger sister, recently widowed and joining him for a fresh start in California. The story earned them sympathetic nods from fellow passengers and avoided unwanted questions. They kept to themselves as much as possible, Dakota always vigilant for any sign of pursuit. As the landscape changed from the plains of Colorado to the mountains of Utah, and eventually the vast deserts of Nevada, their relationship continued to evolve. Forced proximity in the cramped train accommodations might have created tension between strangers, but for Dakota and Katherine, it fostered a deepening understanding. Dakota noticed Katherine's habit of twisting a lock of hair when she was thinking deeply, how she always saved a portion of her meals for later out of ingrained caution, and the way her entire face transformed when she truly smiled, something that happened with increasing frequency as they moved further west. Katherine observed Dakota's quiet strength, his thoughtfulness, and his inherent respect for her autonomy, how he always asked rather than assumed, offered rather than insisted. She noted how other women on the train watched him appreciatively, yet he seemed oblivious to their attention, his focus remaining steadfastly on her comfort and safety. One evening, as their train stopped overnight in a small Nevada town for repairs, they took advantage of the delay to stretch their legs. Walking through the dusty streets, they found themselves discussing their hopes for California. "My cousin's letters describe it as a place where the past doesn't matter much," Dakota said, "where people are judged more by what they can do than where they came from." "That sounds wonderful," Katherine replied, "to be known for myself, not as someone's wife or daughter or responsibility." Dakota stopped walking and turned to her. "How do you want to be known, Katherine?" The question caught her off guard. I'm not sure anyone's ever asked me that before." "I'm asking," he said simply. She considered the question seriously. "I want to be known as capable, independent." She paused, "but also as someone who cares deeply, who matters to someone." "You matter to me," Dakota said quietly. The words hung between them in the gathering dusk. Katherine's eyes searched his face, finding only sincerity there. "And you to me," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Dakota's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. They continued their walk in silence, but something fundamental had been acknowledged between them, a connection that had grown from desperate circumstances into something neither had expected to find. That night, in the small hotel where passengers were housed during the train repairs, Dakota lay awake long after Katherine had fallen asleep in the adjoining room. He thought about the unlikely journey that had brought them together and the uncertain future ahead. He had no illusions about the challenges they would face, yet he found himself more hopeful than he'd been in years. The train resumed its journey the next morning, now just 2 days from Sacramento. As they watched the harsh Nevada landscape roll by, Katherine broke their companionable silence. "What will we do when we reach California?" she asked. "Truly, I mean, beyond staying with your cousin initially." Dakota had been pondering the same question. "I have enough money saved to purchase some land, start building something of my own." He hesitated. "What would you want to do?" Katherine looked out at the passing desert. "I'd like to work, I think, use my skills with numbers, perhaps in a bank or business." She turned back to him. "I never want to be dependent again, to feel trapped by my circumstances." "I wouldn't want that for you either," Dakota said firmly. "Whatever happens between us, Katherine, I want you to always feel free to choose your path." "Between us," she echoed, a question in her voice. Dakota met her eyes directly. "I care for you more than I expected to care for anyone again. But I know you've just escaped one man who tried to control your life. I won't be another." Katherine's expression softened. "You are nothing like Thomas," she said, "nothing at all like any man I've known." "Nevertheless," Dakota continued, "when we reach Sacramento, you should take time to decide what you truly want. If that includes me, in whatever capacity, I would be honored. If not, I will help you establish yourself independently before I move on." Katherine studied him for a long moment. "You're a good man, Dakota Fletcher," she said finally. "Better than I dared hope existed." The train whistle blew, signaling their approach to another small station. The conversation paused, but something had shifted again between them, a clarity of purpose and mutual respect that formed a solid foundation for whatever might come next. 2 days later, they arrived in Sacramento amid the bustle and energy of a city experiencing rapid growth in the aftermath of the gold rush. The air was different here, milder than Colorado, carrying the scent of nearby rivers and distant ocean. Dakota's cousin, Elliot Fletcher, met them at the station, a robust man in his early 40s with the same blue eyes as Dakota, but a more weathered face and boisterous manner. "So this is the sister-in-law you wrote about," Elliot said after embracing Dakota, giving Katherine a friendly but assessing look. "Welcome to California, Mrs. Lawson." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Fletcher," Katherine replied, maintaining their cover story in public. Elliot loaded their modest luggage into his wagon and drove them through the growing city toward his ranch 15 miles outside of town. As they traveled, he updated Dakota on local conditions, land prices, and prospects for newcomers. "Plenty of opportunity for a hard-working man," Elliot assured him. "And for a widow with bookkeeping skills," he added with a meaningful glance at Katherine. It became clear that Elliot had guessed there was more to their story than Dakota had revealed in his brief letter announcing their arrival. But he asked no direct questions, respecting their privacy while offering genuine welcome. Elliot's ranch was impressive, several hundred acres of good grazing land with a substantial house, barns, and outbuildings. His wife, Sarah, greeted them warmly, showing Katherine to a comfortable guest room while Elliot and Dakota unloaded the wagon. "So what's the real story?" Elliot asked bluntly once they were alone. "That woman's running from something, and I'm guessing you're not actually related." Dakota hesitated, then gave his cousin a condensed version of the truth, omitting specific names and locations. Elliot listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. "Dangerous business, helping a woman escape a powerful family," he commented when Dakota finished. "But I'd have done the same." He clapped Dakota on the shoulder. "You're welcome here for as long as you need, and your lady friend too." "She's not exactly not yet, maybe," Elliot interrupted with a knowing smile. "But I've seen how you look at her. More importantly, I've seen how she looks at you when you're not watching." He picked up a crate of supplies. "Give it time, cousin. Some things can't be rushed." Over the next 2 weeks, they settled into life at the Fletcher Ranch. Dakota helped with the cattle and repairs, while Katherine assisted Sarah with household management and began keeping the ranch's financial records in meticulous order, a task Elliot had been neglecting. True to his word, Dakota gave Katherine space to acclimate to their new surroundings and consider her options. They still spoke daily, sharing meals and occasional walks around the property, but he was careful not to pressure her or define their relationship. Katherine, for her part, blossomed in the freedom of her new environment. She began riding lessons with Sarah, explored the local town on market days, and even accompanied Elliot to the bank once her skill with figures became apparent. The haunted look in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by confidence and a quiet joy that Dakota found captivating. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival, Dakota was repairing a fence near the edge of the property when Katherine approached on horseback. She'd become a competent rider surprisingly quickly, and the sight of her confidently handling her mount made him smile. "Sarah sent me to tell you supper will be ready soon," she said, dismounting gracefully. "I'll be done shortly," Dakota replied, hammering a nail into place. "You've become quite the horsewoman," Katherine smiled, patting her horse's neck. "I never had the chance before. Thomas said it wasn't ladylike." She shook her head. "I'm finding there are many things I enjoy that I was never permitted to try." Dakota set down his hammer. "And are you enjoying California?" "Very much." She hesitated. "Elliot took me to town yesterday. There's a position available at the Mercantile keeping their books and managing inventory. The owner's wife is expecting their first child and needs someone reliable to take over her duties." "That sounds perfect for your skills," Dakota said, ignoring the twinge of disappointment at the thought of her moving to town. "Will you take it?" Katherine met his eyes. "I told him I needed to discuss it with you first." Dakota frowned slightly. "You don't need my permission, Katherine." "I know that," she said quickly. "That's not why I wanted to talk with you." She took a deep breath. "Elliot also told me about some land for sale, a smaller parcel adjoining his property to the north. He said you've been considering it." Dakota nodded. "It's good land. I could start with a modest herd, build from there." He looked out over the rolling hills. "Elliot says the owner is motivated to sell quickly." "Is that where you'd build your home?" Katherine asked softly. "If you bought it." "I was thinking so, yes." Dakota turned back to her. "Why do you ask?" Katherine took a step closer to him. "Because I've been thinking about what I want, like you suggested I should." Her voice grew stronger. "I want independence, yes. I want work that uses my abilities, but I've realized something else these past weeks, Dakota." "What's that?" he asked, his heart beating faster. I want to be where you are, she said simply. Not because I need protection or because I'm afraid to be alone, but because when I'm with you I feel whole, like the person I was always meant to be. Dakota set down his tools entirely, turning to face her fully. Katherine, let me finish, she said gently. I know we've known each other only a short time. I know we both carry wounds from the past, but I also know that what's between us is rare and precious. If you're willing, I'd like to see what it might become. Dakota stepped forward and took her hands in his. I've been wanting to tell you the same, he admitted. But I was afraid of rushing you, of making you feel obligated in some way, Katherine laughed softly. You're the only man I've ever known who worries more about my freedom than his own desires. Your freedom matters to me, Dakota said seriously. You matter to me, Katherine. Then perhaps we can find a compromise, she suggested. I could take the position in town, stay at the boarding house there during the week. You could build on your new land. We could court properly. Get to know each other without the pressure of constant proximity or immediate decisions. Dakota considered this. That sounds sensible, he agreed, though the thought of her living in town, away from him, was difficult to accept. But I'd worry about your safety. Bartholomew Lawson's influence doesn't reach California, Katherine reminded him, and I've learned to be cautious. She squeezed his hands. Besides, I'd come to visit on weekends, if you'd want me to. I'd want you to, Dakota confirmed immediately. His blue eyes searched her face. Katherine, I need to tell you something. I think I'm falling in, she pressed a finger gently to his lips. Not yet, she whispered. When you say those words to me, I want it to be because you know me fully, not because of what we've survived together. And when I say them back, and I will, Dakota, I want you to know they come from a place of strength, not gratitude or dependence. Dakota nodded slowly, understanding her wisdom. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then we'll wait, but know that my feelings grow stronger every day. As do mine, she replied softly. They stood together in the fading light, on the edge of land that might soon be Dakota's, the future stretching before them like an unwritten story they would compose together, one chapter at a time. The following months unfolded according to their plan. Dakota purchased the land adjoining Elliott's ranch and began building a modest cabin with his cousin's help. Katherine took the position at the mercantile in town, quickly becoming indispensable to the owner and earning the respect of the community with her efficiency and intelligence. During the week, they lived separate lives, Dakota working his land and beginning to acquire cattle, Katherine developing her independence in town. Weekends became precious time together, with Katherine riding out to the ranch on Friday evenings and returning Sunday afternoons. Their courtship progressed naturally, without the pressure of their earlier circumstances forcing intimacy. They took meals together, attended local gatherings, and spent countless hours in conversation learning each other's histories, dreams, preferences, and quirks. Dakota found himself falling more deeply in love with the woman Katherine was becoming confident, capable, and increasingly joyful than he had with the vulnerable, frightened woman he'd rescued. Katherine, in turn, discovered layers to Dakota that his initial quiet strength had concealed: his dry humor, his thoughtfulness, his occasional stubbornness, and his unwavering integrity. By Christmas of 1878, Dakota's cabin was complete: 2 bedrooms, a comfortable living area with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen that Katherine had helped design during weekend visits. Though simple, it was solid and well built, with windows positioned to capture both sunrise and sunset. The holiday brought a heavy snowfall that kept Katherine at the ranch for several days longer than planned. On Christmas Eve, after dinner with Elliott, Sarah, and their children, Dakota and Katherine returned to his cabin where a fire blazed welcome in the hearth. "I have something for you," Dakota said, retrieving a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. Katherine looked surprised. "We agreed not to exchange gifts." "It's not exactly a gift," Dakota explained, suddenly nervous. "More of a question." Katherine unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with wildflowers along its edges. Inside lay a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," Dakota said softly. The only valuable thing I brought with me from Missouri." Katherine looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Dakota," he took her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life, Katherine. Getting to know you has only deepened what I felt from the beginning." He took a deep breath. "I love you. Not because I rescued you or because of what we've survived together, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, your laugh, everything about you." Tears spilled over onto Katherine's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered, "so much." Dakota dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Katherine Lawson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not to protect you or provide for you, you've proven you can do those things yourself, but to build a life together as equals, as partners in everything." "Yes," Katherine answered without hesitation. "Yes, Dakota Fletcher, nothing would make me happier." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle at first, tentative with the newness of physical affection between them, but quickly deepened into something that expressed all the emotion they'd held in check for months. When they finally parted, both breathless, Dakota rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you'll never regret trusting me with your heart," he said softly. "I know," Katherine replied, her arms tight around his neck, "just as you'll never regret trusting me with yours." They were married on a clear spring day in April 1879, in a simple ceremony at Elliott and Sarah's ranch with a small gathering of friends they'd made in the community. Katherine wore a dress of pale blue silk purchased with her own earnings and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadows surrounding Dakota's property. Dakota, unrecognizable from the solitary rancher who had found a barefoot, crying woman less than a year earlier, beamed with pride and joy as she walked toward him. The local minister who performed the ceremony spoke of partnership, respect, and love freely given and received, words that resonated deeply with the couple who had crafted their relationship so deliberately on those very principles. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," he declared finally. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Dakota kissed his bride, cheers erupted from their small audience. Katherine's smile against his lips was the sweetest thing he'd ever felt. The celebration afterward was lively but modest, reflecting the couple's preference for simplicity. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Dakota and Katherine slipped away from the festivities, riding together to their cabin, now their home, for the first time as husband and wife. Standing on the porch in the fading light, Dakota swept Katherine into his arms and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture that nevertheless felt significant. "Welcome home, Mrs. Fletcher," he said, setting her gently on her feet in their living room. Katherine's eyes sparkled as she looked around the space they had prepared together over the past months. "It's perfect," she said. "Everything is perfect." Later, as moonlight streamed through the bedroom window, Katherine lay in Dakota's arms, their bodies still warm from their first intimate union as husband and wife. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she confessed, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "After everything with Thomas, I thought that part of me was broken forever." Dakota kissed her forehead gently. "Nothing about you is broken, Katherine. You're the strongest person I've ever known," she smiled against his chest. "We healed each other, I think. You were as alone as I was in your own way." "Not anymore," Dakota said, tightening his arms around her. "Neither of us is alone anymore." Over the next 2 years, Dakota and Katherine built their life together with the same care and intention they had built their relationship. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Dakota's knowledge of cattle and land management, paired with Katherine's financial acumen, created a small but successful operation. Katherine continued working at the mercantile part-time, having negotiated a schedule that allowed her to balance her work in town with her life on the ranch. Her employer valued her skills enough to accept this arrangement, especially as Katherine had trained a young assistant who handled operations when she was away. Their partnership extended to every aspect of their lives. They made decisions together, respected each other's strengths, and supported each other through challenges. The difference in their backgrounds sometimes led to differing perspectives, but they had learned to listen to each other with genuine interest and openness. In the spring of 1881, Katherine discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought both joy and apprehension. Memories of her own mother's death in childbirth surfaced, causing anxiety that Dakota helped her work through with patience and understanding. "We'll take every precaution," he promised, holding her close. "The doctor in Sacramento is well trained, and Elliott's offered their guest room for the last month so you'll be closer to town when the time comes." Katherine nodded against his chest. "I'm being foolish, I know. Women have babies every day. Your feelings aren't foolish," Dakota assured her. "They're natural given what you experienced losing your mother, but we'll face this together like everything else." As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, their cabin expanded as well. Dakota, with help from Elliott and neighbors, added another bedroom and enlarged the kitchen, changes they had planned for eventually, but accelerated with the coming child. Katherine bloomed during her pregnancy, her natural beauty enhanced by the new life growing within her. Dakota found himself constantly amazed by her strength and adaptability, watching as she adjusted to her changing body while maintaining her involvement in their ranch operations and her reduced hours at the mercantile. In late November, as planned, they temporarily relocated to Elliott and Sarah's ranch to be closer to medical care. The days of waiting were filled with preparations and anticipation, with Sarah's experienced guidance proving invaluable to the nervous first-time parents. On December 3, 1881, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor, Katherine gave birth to a healthy son they named James Elliott Fletcher, honoring both Katherine's father and Dakota's cousin, who had been so instrumental in their new life. Dakota, who had refused to leave Katherine's side throughout her labor despite the doctor's initial objections, held his son with trembling hands and tears in his eyes. "He's perfect," he whispered, gazing down at the tiny face with its shock of dark hair. "Just like his mother." Katherine, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch her husband's face. "We made him together," she said softly, "our family." The word family carried special significance for both of them, Dakota, who had lost his entire family to illness, and Katherine, whose experience of family had been complicated by her father's early death and her disastrous marriage. Now they were creating something new, built on the foundation of love and respect they had established together. The first months with James were a blur of sleepless nights, countless adjustments, and overwhelming love. They returned to their ranch after Katherine had sufficiently recovered, settling into a new routine centered around their son's needs while maintaining their livelihood. By the spring of 1882, they had found their balance again. James was a happy, healthy baby who delighted in the world around him. Katherine had resumed her part-time work at the mercantile, bringing James with her when Dakota needed to be away from the cabin for ranch work. Their partnership evolved to accommodate their expanded family, each taking on new responsibilities while supporting the other. On a warm evening in May, as the sun set over their land, Dakota and Katherine sat on the porch of their home, James sleeping peacefully in Katherine's arms. The ranch had grown, more cattle now grazed the expanded pastures, and a new barn stood beside the original. Their cabin, once a simple structure, had become a proper home filled with evidence of their life together. "I was thinking about the day we met," Dakota said, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "You were so afraid, so hurt. And you said something I'd never heard before," Katherine remembered, leaning against him. "You don't owe anyone shame. Those words changed everything for me." Dakota smiled, touching his son's tiny hand. "I meant them then, and I mean them now. None of us owes shame to anyone, not you, not me, not our son." "I want to teach him that," Katherine said. "To grow up knowing his worth isn't determined by others' judgments." "We will," Dakota promised, "together." As darkness fell and stars appeared overhead, they remained on the porch, A family forged through unexpected circumstances, yet bound by something far stronger than coincidence or convenience, a love built on choice, respect, and the courage to believe in second chances. Over the next 5 years, the Fletcher family and their ranch continued to flourish. James grew into a curious, energetic boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick mind. In 1884, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Sarah Fletcher, whose arrival was considerably less fraught than her brother's had been. Their ranch expanded gradually as Dakota's careful management and Katherine's financial strategies allowed them to purchase additional land. By 1886, they employed 2 full-time hands to help with the increasing herd and had built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original cabin standing a reminder of where their life together had begun. Katherine eventually left her position at the Mercantile to focus on their ranch's operations and their children, but she maintained her connections in town, serving on the school board and helping organize a small library for the growing community. Her confidence and capabilities earned her respect throughout the area, with few ever suspecting the traumatic circumstances that had brought her to California. Dakota watched his wife's transformation with pride and admiration. The barefoot, crying woman he had found beside a cottonwood tree was now a strong, respected matriarch, secure in herself and her place in the world. He often marveled at how their chance encounter had changed both their lives so profoundly. In the autumn of 1887, nearly 10 years after their first meeting, Dakota received a letter forwarded through several acquaintances, a precaution they still maintained despite the years and distance from Kansas City. The letter, from a former neighbor in Colorado, contained news that Bartholomew Lawson had died, his business empire crumbling in the years following his obsessive search for his daughter-in-law. The neighbor mentioned rumors that the old man had spent a fortune sending men as far as Canada and Mexico looking for Katherine, driven by a combination of rage and guilt that eventually destroyed his health. That evening, after the children were asleep, Dakota shared the letter with Katherine as they sat before the fire in their comfortable living room. "How do you feel about this?" he asked gently after she had read it. Katherine was quiet for a long moment, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. "I feel free," she said finally. "Even though I've been free for years, some small part of me was always looking over my shoulder, wondering if he would somehow find us." Dakota nodded, understanding. "And now?" "Now that chapter is truly closed," she said, folding the letter and placing it on the table beside her. She looked around their home at the photographs of their children on the mantel, the books lining the shelves Dakota had built for her, the quilt Sarah had made for their wedding draped over the sofa. "Our life here is the only one that matters." Dakota took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band. She still wore his mother's ring that had come to symbolize not just their marriage but the journey that had brought them together. "I was thinking we might take a trip," he said. "Show the children San Francisco, perhaps." "James has been asking about the ocean." Katherine smiled, the worry lines that had briefly appeared upon reading the letter smoothing away. "I'd like that. A family adventure." Dakota leaned forward and kissed her softly. "I love you, Katherine Fletcher," he said, the words still carrying the weight and wonder they had the first time he'd spoken them. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, her eyes reflecting the firelight and the depth of feeling that had grown between them over the years. "For finding me when I was lost, for seeing strength in me when I felt broken, and for building this life with me step by step." Later that night, as they lay in bed with moonlight spilling through the window, Katherine turned to Dakota, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't decided to take that shortcut home that day? If you hadn't found me by that tree?" Dakota considered the question seriously. "I used to think it was chance," he admitted. "Now I believe it was something more, not fate exactly, but possibility. 2 lives moving toward each other through all the pain and loneliness, finding what they needed most when they least expected it." Katherine nestled closer to him. Whatever brought us together, I'm grateful for it every day. As am I, Dakota whispered, his arms tightening around her. As am I. Outside their window, the California night was filled with stars, distant lights burning in the darkness, much like the hope that had guided them from their first desperate meeting to this moment of contentment. A barefoot woman's tears, a cowboy's compassionate words, and the journey that followed had brought them here to a life neither could have imagined on that stormy afternoon in Colorado, but one they had built together, choice by choice, day by day, with love and intention. As they drifted toward sleep, secure in each other's embrace, the ranch around them stood as testament to what could grow from the smallest seeds of kindness, encourage a legacy of love that would sustain them through whatever challenges still lay ahead, and endure in the lives of their children long after their own story was complete.